my name's Dovell Bonnett, and I'm the founder and CEO of Access Smart. And first of all, I want to say what a great privilege it is to be here on the HexCon21 conference to talk to you about one of my most favorite and passionate topics, password security. Now, you probably have heard that I have about 30 years experience within security, smart cards, and cybersecurity. And so I've certainly seen a lot of changes in the way security has been handled on networks over these last 30 years. So let's get into the topic right away. One of the first questions I always ask me is, Dovell, where do you think cybersecurity begins? Cybersecurity begins when the employee first turns on the computer. That's where it begins. Now, there's a lot of things that have to be done before the firewall. You need to authenticate that the person coming in is really who they say they are. And how do you do that? Or as I like to say when knocking on the virtual front door, who's knocking? Also, when you start getting into the logging into applications, clouds, servers, it's where cybersecurity also is important and how you log into that. One of the last components to be considering about that is often overlooked is how do you log off of the computer? And logging off the computer is just as important as logging in. You need the security there. You certainly don't want to have a computer that's running with no one attending to it, that's an open node that a hacker can get into and then get into your network, or somebody can walk in behind you and then get onto your computer and do whatever damage they want to do. So log off is just as important. And you look at some of these third-party applications that are on the web that go and manage your passwords. Well, none of them handle the log off. So this is where we have to go and talk about log off also. Now, would you believe that a lot of cases the company's first line of defense is non-existent? And that is, how do they really authenticate that the person coming into their network and onto the computer is really who they say they are? A user and password doesn't cut it anymore because you don't know really is that the correct person to be logging in. Second thing is, they allow the weakest link of cybersecurity to manage those passwords. That's right, the employee. The employee manages the passwords, and as soon as they start having that control, as IT has given them the ability to manage their own passwords, they have now relinquished security to the employee. And the network security is now dependent upon how secure and how strong that password is that the employee generated. And if any password is used, if a legitimate username and password is used to log in, IT has no way of blocking it. So this is why credential theft is so important. And IT can also sometimes be their own worst enemy when it comes to cybersecurity, where they come up with the policies and the procedures that are complex, that are long, and they look great on paper. But when it comes down to practicality and the using of it, it is not that secure, or it can cause a lot of security issues that really need to be addressed. Now, years ago, I wrote a book on cybersecurity, actually on identity theft protection. And I had the artists from the Dummies people create this comic for me, which basically says, well, whoever stole my password was sure clever, especially since none of my reminders are missing. Well, they don't need to steal reminders. All they have to do is take out their cell phone and smartphone and just take a picture of all the notes or just write them down. So this is how easy it is. And the thing is, when cybersecurity becomes cumbersome to the employee, they will always find ways to circumvent security for their own convenience or productivity. And I've also run into cases where I'm talking to management, they actually encourage people not to have strong passwords or to go and implement a lot of the security policies that IT puts in place because it lowers productivity. And to them, productivity is far more important than security. And that's a shame. So what we need to be able to do is to go and get convenience and productivity and security all put together. So why do I think we don't have a password problem? Well, we don't have a password problem. We have a password management problem. And you think about it, what are some of the ways that people complain about passwords? Well, you're using passwords everywhere. There's too many passwords. We write password down on sticky notes. We're telling others what the passwords are. We pick the weak passwords, and we have complicated password rules that we have to follow. Well, none of that has anything to do with the security of a password and the mechanism of password authentication. All of that is password management problems. So when you get these people who start talking about, oh, we're going to go and kill passwords, well, they're not going to kill passwords. Passwords are one of the 3 factors of authentication. It's the knowledge base. And you're not going to go and get rid of one of the factors just so you can have 2. And that, of course, will ruin the security. That lessens your security by only having 2 factors as opposed to 3. Also, passwords are very cheap. They're easy to change. They're easy to manage compared to a lot of the other types of things. And systems already have passwords in there. So why not leverage off of what's already there? And also, passwords are actually protected in the U.S. by the 5th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, because you cannot self-incriminate yourself. And because it's knowledge, you can't go and reveal that information. So you have a protection that you can't get from something you have, which is a card. The authorities can take that away from you. There's no protections on that. And something you are, which is the biometrics, they can go and force to take your fingerprint. They can go and take your photograph. You have no say in the subject whatsoever. But they can't take your knowledge. They can't take your password from you. So when we get into the multi-factor authentication, one of the things I want to start with is who is the gatekeeper? And a lot of times that's missed because people will think, oh, well, I've got a smartphone and I got a computer and I got a knowledge. Well, I've got multi-factor authentication. Maybe not, because really the gatekeeper is the computer, and the gatekeeper wants to see something different, something you have, and they want to see something that you know and maybe something that you are. Just because you have it all doesn't mean that the computer recognizes it and will approve it. So think of it from the perspective of the gatekeeper or as the computer. Now, there's a lot of things they talk about as to new ways to do multi-factor authentication with location or behavioral. That's not multi-factor because that's not recognized yet. And also that you can have these systems where you have something I have, and then you get a text code and you have to type that in. That's something you have also. Those are two-factor or two-step verification. Those are not multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. It's something you know and something you know. So, as I said, multi-factor authentication has to be something you have, something you know, and something you are. And to be true multi-factor authentication, you have to combine 2 dissimilar factors. So that's where you get your have, no, have, are, no, are, have, no, are, all the combinations you can come up with. But when you get an SMS code or an email that comes in with a code, again, that's not because you're looking at a code. It's something you know because you read it. And then you're typing in your password. It's something you know. So it's a no-no situation. So one of the problems we also have when it comes to logging in and authentication is so many systems are still using single-factor authentication. And it doesn't matter what factor you're using, because when it's something you have, it can be stolen. It's weak. It could be something you know. It doesn't matter. It's weak. It can be stolen. And it can be something you are. It's something that can be stolen. So having any one of these factors by itself keeps the system insecure. It's when you start putting these 2 together, you have to go and try to force the hacker to be able to acquire 2 parts of information. And if the hackers are overseas or not located anywhere near you, that becomes more and more difficult. How are they going to get the, let's say something you have, an ID badge, and also know what your PIN is? They're not. And so this is where, again, by combining 2 or more dissimilar factors, you really start increasing your security. Authenticators. Well, we've all seen these authenticator programs on the smartphone through SMS and all of that. Well, as I said, it's not MFA, it is 2-step verification. Smartphone authenticators, they'll use SMS, they will use 2-step, and some are starting to maybe trying to figure out the multi-factor of how to use a smartphone. And the way you have to do that is that you have to be able to present your smartphone itself to a reader, to the computer, that it reads something unique, something that you don't know and have no access to. So that's where you can start adding in some MFA using a smartphone. But you're going to ask yourself, when it comes to these smartphones, who really owns that smartphone? It's not the company. And it's not IT, it's the individual, it's the person, it's the employee. And you don't know where else they're going to. What other sites are they visiting? What are they doing? Who else is using that phone and where are they going? And are you picking up viruses? Are you picking up malware? Are you creating a problem that IT just cannot prevent because you've got somebody else managing it? So this is again where you have to be careful in what you're doing with these smartphone devices, that you don't pick up rogue information or rogue programs in there. OTP, one-time passwords. Well, we've all seen these little devices that you have to carry, and it changes every single time. Well, that just gets you into one server. That's how it's used. And so if you have multiple servers, multiple accounts you have to get into, you're going to need a separate one of these tokens for each one of those. And so what, you're going to have a pocket full of tokens? I don't think so. And then they start putting it onto the smartphone. Well, you get some of these smartphone apps, these authenticator apps, and now you got this long list of different applications that use that authenticator, and you've got to scroll to find the right one that you want to get into. It just becomes a problem. And again, each one of those have to be synced separately to each application, each server that you're trying to get into. So it's not one number for everything. PKI, public key infrastructure, and the certificates. That gets a lot of attention. It's very secure. It certainly has a lot of positive attributes to it. But one of the problems is its expense. It is very expensive to implement, and a lot of times small companies, small industries, small agencies cannot afford a full PKI system. So there are different things that they're trying to do along with that. So be careful when you go to the PKI route. There's a new one that I want to present to you is Password Authentication Infrastructure. And with a PAI type system, we're going to use a lot of the security that we find in the PKI system, but now we're going to use it in the PAI. And why not? I mean, when you really think about it, what keeps the private key secure? Well, let's talk about that. What keeps it secure has nothing to do with the algorithm of PKI. Everybody knows what the algorithm is. It doesn't matter if it's elliptic curve, it doesn't matter if it's RSA or something else. We all know it. The other thing is it's not how the keys are generated. We all know how keys are generated, so it can't be that. And it's not the complexity of the infrastructure. And sometimes I got to tell you, when it comes to the complexity of an infrastructure, that actually makes it less secure because you don't know all the components, all the people are touching, and what kind of security they have in place. And if they have a flaw in their security, and we have seen this over the years, that it creates a domino effect. And you really do not have any security there and control over what some other company is going to be doing. We've seen CAs that have been broken into, which then have caused bogus certificates and caused a lot of damage into different companies because of that. So what does it really keep secure? It's really what makes PKI secure is how you protect that private key. And what are they doing to protect that private key? Well, they're doing things like encryption. They're doing things like hashing hashing the private key. They're using smart cards. They're allowing so the people don't know it. So these are some of the techniques and mechanisms that are used to protect that private key. Well, I like to think that from a security aspect, private key is nothing more than a glorified password. To the computer, a private key is just a bunch of zeros and ones of a fixed length. Well, a password is just a bunch of zeros and ones. But what's unique about passwords is that they are not set to a fixed length. They could be any length. A PKI, you're told that it has to be 256 bits and characters, whatever it's going to be. Well, with a password, I can have it as a 8 character, I could have a 12, I could have it a 16, 20, 25, 50, 100, 150, 250, 500 characters long. It doesn't matter. And I can change it as often as I want. So maybe one day it's 16, the next day it's going to be 45 characters long. I have that flexibility with passwords that I don't have with PKI and private keys. So this is where, again, the password advantages over the PKI system is that you have these variable lengths, and because you can constantly be changing the length of a password, you're forcing the hackers to go and try more combinations. They have to start from everywhere between maybe 8 characters all the way up to 500. But if a PKI is only 256 characters, and we all know it's going to be 256, well, shoot, all they have to do is start with 256 and start with the first one version of it and go on up. So it actually lowers the number of numbers that they have to go and test. And when you get to some of these quantum computers and other things that are going on to speed up computer processing power, these numbers become more and more vulnerable to an attack. You can't change a PKI certificate very easily. I mean, you can change it, but to change it, you have to buy a whole new certificate. And when you buy that new certificate and start using it, anything that was used on the old certificate can't be read by the new, and the new can't be read by the old. And so now you have to have a card or some type of mechanism that keeps both certificates involved, and that just adds more and more cost. But with a password, I can change it as frequently as I want. I can change it every month. I can change it every week, every day, every minute, if I deem that is the security that I need in place. And if I don't have to manage it and do it myself, it's all done automatically, who cares? It's invisible to me. I don't require a complex infrastructure when it comes to passwords. Everyone knows how to use passwords. All the software already has password security in there. It's very easy. You can tie it into Active Directory. But when you get into PKI, you've got revocation lists, you've got CAs, you've got people that have to go and, first of all, get all of your documentation to prove that you really are who you say you are, and you have to send it all in. And it just becomes a lot of different components. And how are you going to trust somebody else's certificate? So there's a huge infrastructure that's required for doing PKI. And with that expansive infrastructure also is a higher cost. And this is where we have seen some certificate PKI systems put into place that's cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to actually implement the whole thing and to go and train the employees to be able to understand in the IT how to use it. So with passwords, nobody needs to be trained on it. They know how to use it. And the thing that keeps the private key so secure is that the users don't know the private key. So why do they need to know a password? They don't. So this is kind of where the whole PAI type system works in, is let's take the employee management passwords out of the equation. Let's put it back in the hands of IT where it can be centrally managed and changed according to their policies. Now, a lot of time people start talking about biometrics. We're going to go passwordless, and we're going to use biometrics. Well, biometrics has its good points, but it also has its bad points. And some of the bad points is that, first of all, it's public knowledge. When you touch a water glass or you touch anything, you've left your fingerprint behind. That can be stolen and lifted. You take a camera, you can take somebody's picture. You can get a recording of somebody's voice. So they start coming up with all of these different complex ways in order to prevent those being used and being compromised. Well, those complex ways means readers are more expensive, and so that adds to the cost. And can you afford that type of a solution? Also, you can't change your biometrics. Well, some people will say that, well, I'm going to get a facelift or something like that. Okay, fine, but you're not going to do a full facial reconstruction every week or every month because you have to change your biometrics as you change your passwords or every 90 days. So you can't change it. You're not going to get a new eye. You're not going to get a new fingerprint. You're not going to get a new voice. So once you have your biometric or information stolen, then it is stolen for life. And this is where I don't like having biometrics stored on servers or in any type of public domain that someone can get to and steal that. It has to be stored on something that is in the possession of the individual. And that, again, is where I think smart cards come in great as that type of storage, where you're going to authenticate through biometrics to a template that is stored on the card. And that's where the comparison is being done. The other thing about passwords is that they can't be stolen with a camera or with a dusting powder or a recorder. They're knowledge. They're in your head. Now, there's certainly, if you have a keylogger or a camera where people are typing in their passwords, well, again, that's the weakness of passwords the way it currently stands, is that people are typing in it. It's employee-managed passwords. But if you get rid of that, where they don't know the passwords and they don't have to type them, you get rid of all of those types of threats, too. And the other thing is, of course, with passwords, the equipment is cheap, and sometimes there's nothing. It's zero in the cost because you already have everything in place. So why passwords? If a private key or a biometric template were managed as poorly as passwords have been managed, they would be just as weak. So again, it's how the industry has come up with ways to protect the private key and the biometrics that help keep it secure. So let's start adding those same type of technologies, methodologies into protecting passwords. The other thing is we don't have a password security problem. Passwords can be secure in that you can have long, complex passwords. You can have passwords that change frequently. You can have passwords that are salted and hashed and encrypted, and all the other kinds of mechanisms that are used to protect a private key is used for protecting the password. But what we do have is a password management problem. And that's what we need to get rid of, and that's where I want to go into the password authentication infrastructure of how we get rid of the management problem. So when you start looking at passwords, there's kind of three parts that you need. And we talk about having multi-factor authentication. We've already described multi-factor authentication. You should know that pretty well by now. Also, you need to have an IT centralized password manager. And this is where you have IT coming up with the rules, the policies, the procedures of what a password has to be, how often it has to change, all of that. So again, you're keeping the employee out of the equation. And then the last part is that you have your password wallet. And this is where all the actual passwords are stored to the different accounts. And they can be stored in such a way that the user doesn't need to know them. All they need to see is that, oh, I need to get into XYZ account. And they just simply double click on it and it launches the Internet Explorer, it launches the browser, whatever, brings up the logon screen, automatically fills in the username password for you, and you just sit there and watch it all happen. So this is where a lot of the single sign-on components do work, and this is what's used. But a lot of times they don't have the first part, which is the MFA or the IT centrally managed portion of it. So just to kind of show you where some of this has to work, a lot of times we'll see security put in place where it's three individual products. They are done by three different companies or services, and they're not really related to each other. And sure, they have a multi-factor authentication, they got a manager, and they got a wallet. But because they're not tied together, not integrated together, and you maybe have to force IT to try to figure out how to make them all work together, that's where you can leave gaps into the security, into these different parts of the security complex here. And that's what hackers go after, are those gaps. And this is what you need to be able to start integrating in with so that you can block those gaps and keep those gaps away from the hackers. So when you get into the PAI type system, you're going to integrate these systems. So this is where like a company will go ahead and put together all three parts and understand how all three parts interrelate to each other and share and protect each other. And so that's where the infrastructure comes into play. So it's overlapping. And by doing that overlapping, you don't have the gaps, and the attacks can be defended against and blocked from getting into your computer network. So we talked now a little bit about what PAI is all about. So just kind of in summary, PAI is made up of true multi-factor authentication, and that's where you have a card and you might have a PIN to the card. You present your card, you type in your PIN. That just says, I know the secret to go in and unlock the card. The next important, you have the IT centralized password management. So now the password to actually log on to that computer has been determined by IT. And it might be a 40-character long password, and the username might not even have anything to do with your email address. It's all managed by them. You don't know it, you don't type it, but that's where it's controlled. And then when you're going into your other sites, you of course have the enterprise password wallet, which again IT can control as to how secure those passwords have to be, how frequently they have to change. But the other beautiful thing about having an enterprise password wallet is that IT can also control what accounts you do have access to and what you don't have access to. And that's very important. So as you kind of talked about in on the second slide, here's kind of like the trilogy of what has to occur here. And you really are securing the log on, which is logging on the computer. You're securing the log in to a network, a cloud, a website, and then you're also securing the log off. And when you use a smart card, like we've talked about before, what we're able to do is to be able to take, when you remove that card, it could be a CAC card, a PIF card, employee ID badge, but when you remove it from the reader, now IT has set up that, okay, when the card is removed, I'm going to log the user off the network. Great, you don't leave a node there. Or maybe they want to have it to where it locks down in place. Okay, they need to lock the computer, and then when the person comes back, they have to represent their card and their PIN to unlock the computer. Okay, that keeps a node off the network by doing that. Or maybe they actually want to go and have it when the card's removed, the computer is completely shut down. And that has worked very well. And there have been some cases where that has actually saved a company from being hacked, because when the card was removed, there was no computer for anybody to get into and access. So log off is very important, and it has to be done with the card. And we're also removing employee managed passwords, because once IT has full control over this, you don't need the employee to be involved in any of it anymore. All they need to do is insert the card and type where they want to go, or click where they want to go. And that's all they have to do. And IT can also configure the password manager and the password wallet to meet their company's policies. What I don't like is certainly when you have companies that have a security process and they say, okay, our software does this. You have to go and change your policies in order to meet our capabilities. No. Because every company, every industry can have different requirements, different standards that they have to meet, and the software has to be able to be flexible enough to be changed to meet that company's policies. Now, certainly there's going to be some cases, and we've seen this numerous times, where we actually have a recommendation, and the company looks at that and goes, oh, we hadn't thought about that. Yeah, let's go ahead and implement that one too. So you can learn from each other. Now, as I kind of talked about the smart cards and all, one of the things I really like to use is the employee ID badge. And we can, you can do this with the contact card. You can do it with a contactless card. I'm showing a contact chip here, kind of like what would be used by the government with the CAC card or the PIV card or the CIV card. But a lot of companies also have the same type of an ID badge. But it's the same badge they already have. They already own it. They use it to go and enter a building. They hold it up to the door. It beeps. It lets them in. So why not use that same technology where you place the card onto a reader that's connected to your PC. It's reading the unique identifier of the contactless, as well as then you're typing in your PIN. You don't have to add any new technology. You don't have to replace. You don't have to rebadge. That's a huge cost savings to a lot of companies. It's very affordable. HR and IT only has one card that they have to manage. If the employee leaves the company, they just take back their card, and because the employee doesn't know any of the passwords, there's no back door. They can't get in because they don't have the card to get in. There's multiple uses for one of these cards. So why not go and have logical access, physical access? Maybe you want payment systems in the card also when they go to the cafeteria. Who knows whatever else you want to put in with that. But then again, the more times that card needs to be touched, the sooner it's going to be discovered if that card was lost or stolen. And if you only have one application, then you just have to wait for that person to come into that one place and, oh, I don't have my card. Well, with have multiple applications, they're going to see it sooner, and they're going to contact IT to say, hey, I've lost my card, and they can go ahead and start shutting things down and start protecting the company from any type of attack. And then again, it gets, the last one I just kind of laugh at is with the battery power. With cards, you don't have any batteries. You don't have to recharge it. You don't have to worry about any type of apps being added to the card because the employees don't have access to the apps that can go into a card. And so then you can keep that level of security in there. And it's very convenient for the employee to be able to use. So I'm just kind of concluding that to me, passwords are secure. And the biggest problem is how they are managed. And it's the employee managed passwords that really make a company vulnerable to an attack. And we've certainly seen the reports that have been out there that a cybersecurity attack, according to IBM Security Report in 2021, is now over $4 million per incident that can occur. We've also seen reports from Microsoft, from Google, from NIST, from the NSA that say by adding multi-factor authentication with these other products, you're able to go and block about 99 to 100% of the vulnerabilities that a password could have from a brute force attack or any other kind of attack. So if you can reduce your exposure to an attack by 98% by just doing one simple little thing of securing passwords the right way, that's a huge benefit, and it doesn't cost very much to be able to do that. So I hope you found this presentation exciting and interesting, and I hope you also understand the passion that I'm in. So again, I just want to go ahead and thanks HexCon21 for this opportunity to explain to you why I think passwords are extremely secure and why you're not going to get rid of them. And what we really need to be able to do is start managing the passwords better by removing the weakest link, the employee. Thank you very much for your time. You all have a great show. Bye-bye.